So brand purpose is a really funny thing. I mean, we all know how important it is. We know that customers expect more from brands now today more than ever. Yet, before the pandemic, there was kind of like this collective eye roll when it came to brand purpose. So we're going to talk a little bit today about how to do it right and how to do it wrong. We'll start with the negative first, and then we'll get into the good stuff. So we have an amazing panel here today. I'm going to welcome everybody individually, and they can just kind of wave and say hello. So we have Lewis Woodward, who's head of brand and communications at JLL, which is one of the largest commercial real estate companies in the world. Welcome, Lewis.
Hi there, good to be here.
Nice to see you. We have Amy Fuller, who's global CMO at Accenture, a company that needs no introduction.
Hello, all.
Welcome. We have Ken Banks, who's head of social purpose at Yachty, which is an app that is dedicated to identity and privacy.
Hello there.
Nice to see you. We have Duncan Young, Director of Business Communications at NatWest, which is one of the largest commercial banks in the UK.
Hey, Kenneth, nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Duncan. We also have Becky Skiles, who's the CMO of Deloitte Digital, another company that needs no introduction.
Hi, happy to be here.
Welcome. And last but not least, we have Jillian Daines, who's Director of We Communications, which is one of the largest comms and integrated marketing agencies in the world.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome. Yeah, so as I mentioned, great panel. We're gonna dive right into it and talk about, when it comes to purpose, what did brands do wrong? Why was there this kind of backlash that had existed? And I'll feel free to throw this out to the crowd, whoever wants to jump in. And
can I jump in?
Amy.
Because we just did our purpose and just launched it 2 weeks ago. And so we had the benefit of the what not to do experiences from others. And in fact, we were working with Droga5, who had just joined the Accenture Interactive family. So they came in as experts on purpose, but also the work they were doing was for their own selves as well as for Accenture overall. So it was interesting. And we were really careful that purpose is not equal to social impact. Not one, it encompasses the value you drive and of course your values. But for it to work and endure, it's got to capture your day job, the actual value that you drive as a commercial enterprise. And that is how we approached it. So the language and the idea we came out with was all about delivering on the promise of technology and human ingenuity. That is a commercial promise as well as a values-laden promise. And I'll just do one example and then I'll stop talking, is that when we look at cloud migrations, which are an immense part of what anyone in our business is doing right now on behalf of clients, we have a proprietary tool that allows you to model out how green can your cloud idea be, because there is a huge, huge possibility of making a big impact on the environment in the positive sense with how you do a cloud migration. And we help with that. We call it Green Cloud for obvious reasons. And that's an example of it's living out values, but it is also inherently what we do in our day jobs commercially.
Great, thank you. I mean, somebody at a brand, Duncan, I mean, you tell me a little bit about, how you've seen, other brands out there do it wrong, or what your opinion is about how people could do it more right.
Yeah, I think one of the kind of obvious problems that we had with brand purpose, and if we have time to come back to it, I've got a problem with the terminology, is that I think at the beginning, certainly, or we went through a period where it was an exercise in finding an issue which you thought was of interest to your kind of target demographic, and then essentially sort of virtue signaling around it, rather than trying to find ways of communicating your brand in a way that represents what your organization's all about. And I think those two things are very different.
Great. I mean, Jillian, from a communication standpoint, obviously there's a lot of heavy lifting that comms needs to do. What were people kind of missing out with, and what are some best practices? And Duncan, if you can mute, that'd be great. Thank you.
I think Amy and Duncan have really brought up some key points, and I'd add to that by saying jumping on the bandwagon is something that has happened in the past when there's been a moment in the media or in the world where people have felt okay and people feel strongly about something. There's been a temptation to make that the core of the purpose of your business, whether in fact that's authentic to what you do in your everyday work and the resources and the skills that you have to offer as an organization. So I think, as Amy and Duncan were saying, by identifying what it is that you do and you do best and you contribute to the world, and then taking that as the core, that's the better way to do it. And I think we're starting to see more and more people do that. Of course, from a communications perspective, but I would also say we have started to see a lot of organizations begin to communicate their purpose much better than they had done in the past. I think previously a lot of brands had actually been doing really great work, but maybe it hadn't been consolidated under the umbrella of a really strong purpose statement and hadn't been communicated as well as it could have been. And the reason that matters is actually in order to lead your industry forward, in order to drive real change with other people and start to have an impact and drag everyone else along with you as a leader, you need to communicate and tell people what you're doing. So as a communications professional, I would say that's really key.
Perfect. Becky, I'm going to punt it over to you because I know that Deloitte did some interesting research about this earlier in the year, just kind of about consumers' perceptions about purpose. And if you want to just give us a top line or some of the interesting stats that we might need to know.
Sure, thanks. So I think the brands that we're seeing do this well are doing it authentically. To Amy's point about the green cloud, I think where we're seeing brands hit sour notes with this is when there's dissonance between the brand message and the actual activities of the business. We've seen increased scrutiny on this, especially during the pandemic. And some of the research that we've done recently in both our global marketing trends and here locally in the UK has shown that customers are really voting with their feet if they're not seeing the promise from the top line come all the way through to the way that brands are treating not just their customers, but their employees. Customers have been saying that, we will be more likely to shop and spend with brands that take care of their employees, that show real concern. And on the flip side, that we're going to walk away in increasing numbers for companies that say nice things in the media, but then don't treat their customers or their employees with actual intent to mirror that statement and that true purpose. So really, it's been an interesting time where a lot of that stuff has just kind of catalyzed away and really shown how important this is to get it right, but to really live it right.
Right. So Lewis and Ken, I'm going to come to you guys next, and I think I'll just drill into that a little bit deeper. Given everything that's changed in the world, I mean, we could talk about that for a million hours. The idea of purpose and the importance of it seems to have increased. I mean, what are some of the impacts that you've seen from COVID on purpose? And I'll start with Ken.
Thank you. Well, good to be here. I think Black Lives Matter, COVID, the upheaval we've seen in 2020 has really refocused people's attention on something that's always been there, but it kind of always seems to get pushed back. So people that are looking to try and understand a brand's purpose and a business's purpose can find it, but it's not always that easy to find. I think the last few months we've seen it really pushed out front and center. Some companies have done that very well. I think there's examples that we all know of companies that have done that not so well, and there's been a certain amount of jumping on the bandwagon. For me, my background is humanitarian work. So I was working in global development for 25 years, and there's an assumption, isn't there, that charities and global development organizations, they have a good, ethical, solid purpose. Charities exist for good reasons. Of course, businesses don't have that luxury, although we do have bad charities, of course. So for me, a health organization doesn't do agriculture work, and an agricultural organization doesn't often do human rights work. And I think the struggle I've seen with purpose in business is sometimes you see a business that is portraying a particular purpose, and it doesn't clearly align with what that business does. And I think that's when it starts to get very messy for me. So I give you a quick example. I think the extractive industry is a great one. I really struggle with mining companies, oil companies pushing their green credentials when we know that their very core existence is creating the problem that they're deeming to sort of solve. And then you have little CSR teams sitting in the corner doing nice little projects while the rest of the company is causing havoc. And I think Facebook's another example of that too. There's some lovely little Facebook projects going on around democracy and human rights, but daily the platform is fueling online hatred, it's fueling violence, it's fueling misinformation. So I think there's a lot of tensions there and a lot of contradictions. And I think this year in particular, the general public have become far more aware and recognize those far more than they used to.
Great, great. So Lewis?
Yeah, I mean, look, really great points all around so far. I suppose the bit that I would add on to where Ken was going is, you know, in any times of uncertainty or change, I think that's then the acid test for an organization. And never before do brands really get measured by the public into how they come out of difficult situations. And obviously the global pandemic is a heightened one. I think going into it, consumers were probably too busy to really understand what an organization's purpose really was. And I think they see it, they hear it, but, you know, I'd be skeptical as to how many of them made purchase decisions purely on the basis of a brand's values being aligned to their own preferences. I think it's a factor. I'd be equally interested in what Becky said in terms of those people that then boycott organizations because they're seeing things take place that doesn't quite feel right, but they've made that purchase potentially on a price point rather than on anything else. But to the point that you're asking, how's COVID and the pandemic impacted organizations? I think it really puts businesses on the line. If you're coming out with a message that you have certain values, or you're pursuing certain programs, and you're treating people in certain ways, and you're seen to be not doing that in a heightened state of uncertainty, I think that's when your own people, firstly, will lose confidence in purpose. And I didn't get a chance to jump in on the first question, but I think these two go hand in hand. If you have not got your organization completely embedded and supported and aligned on what purpose is, and they feel respectful of that and it means something to them, your consumers aren't, because at some point your consumers and your people are going to come into interact with each other. So I think firstly I would protect the fact you've got to make sure your own people believe in what you're doing. You've got to behave appropriately by them, and they will then deliver that message into the marketplace. It's been a really interesting time. You know that when big change happens, you see the very best of people and companies, and unfortunately you see the very worst, and people will always be opportunistic. I think consumers are savvy, they're smart now, they're more intelligent than ever before when it comes to what marketing strategies and what people are doing. And I think they quickly weed out those organizations that are just doing this for a short-term gain, rather than doing something which has sustainable returns for them and the business.
Yeah, very well stated. I mean, I guess just to piggyback off that that comment, Amy, since you've just launched your own platform, which I believe is called Let There Be Change.
It is. Good one. Thank you.
How do you launch that internally first? How do you get people to buy in? Because we know the internal people are just as skeptical as the external people, and if they don't believe it, it's not going to work. I mean, it's proven over and over again.
Becky, you raised it first, and I couldn't agree more that the inside, and especially for a professional services provider, because our people, of which we have over 500,000 globally, are quite literally the brand. And I'm not talking about brand ambassadors. They are, in fact, the product itself. They are sales, they are distribution, they're literally the brand. And so how we got to where we got to involved surveying all of them. And this was about, I don't know, a handful of months ago. And we had responses from 28,000 of our people all over the world, all different levels, all different aspects of the business, to find out, well, starting with purpose, does it really matter? Is it a buzzword, or actually is it meaningful? And yes, it is. And do you act with purpose? Yes, I do. Well, tell us what it is. No words. And that was the work order for my team and the Droga team, was find it and articulate it. And then on the other side, go back and make sure that what you think it is in fact true. And so we did that both with clients and with our own people, which got us to this idea of delivering on the promise of technology and human ingenuity. And that should not change. That is the North Star for the enduring future. And it helped animate and decide what our business strategy for the next 5 years is, and our brand idea. And in fact, the question for right now is, what does it mean right now to deliver on that promise? And the other thing that we saw from our clients, we saw this consistently pre-COVID and then turbocharged, was the idea that change that companies are experiencing is not a one-time event. You don't do a one-time transformation and then you're good. In fact, it is a continuous process. And so dealing with perpetual change in a way that works for the organization and all of its stakeholders became our idea. And in fact, it comes out of our business strategy, also launched at the same time. So we had sort of a triple play going on, which is all about 360-degree value delivered to our clients by embracing change. And so 360-degree value is all of your constituents. It's your people, it is your shareholders, it's your partners, it's your clients or customers, and it's the communities that you work in. And so it was, I always say about the work that we were doing over the past several months is COVID became the stress interview for the thinking, because we really had to look at, okay, we thought our purpose was this, we thought the business strategy was this, we thought the brand idea was this, is it still true? I mean, this is the worst of the worst, is it still true? And in fact, it was more true, but it was true pre the conditions of COVID as well. But we do find that the people dynamic is the single most important thing. And when we did our validation of this delivering on the promise of technology and human ingenuity, we heard a lot about, yeah, I love it, but is it true all day, every day? And that's exactly what you want your purpose to be,
Right.
Not true all day, every day. Otherwise, you've just described the status quo, which is not useful to you as an organization. It should feel like something you want to be true all day, every day. And we are absolutely delivering it, more times than not, but it's something to really keep doing.
Right. Great. So Becky and Jillian, I saw you both nodding vehemently. Jillian, tell me a little bit why you were nodding in agreement, and then Becky, I'll come back to you if there's any additional stats or supporting things, because I know you touched on this earlier.
Well, I guess it's because I was, after saying communication is absolutely key, I was also agreeing with the idea that, of course, how you do it and what you say is so important. And it has to be from the inside out and from the top down and the bottom up. Like, it has to be everybody completely embedded in that belief and that ambition that you have together as an organization. I think that's absolutely core. And I know a lot of the work that we do with clients is about making sure that the internal and the external message are completely shared and completely aligned. Because if you don't get the inside people on board first, then how can you possibly be convincing the outside world about what you're doing? So I completely agree with that point. And the other thing I just wanted to agree with was around how you kind of continually track and progress and stay agile in terms of your purpose. Because I think one of the mistakes that people have made in the past is making big statements and goals, but then not following up on those in terms of how they communicate their progress and being really honest about that. And, sometimes we don't progress as quickly as we hoped. The world changes, things that are happening this year must have really thrown a lot of plans off track or forced people to change them. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be transparent about how that change has affected us and what we need to do to move forward. So that's something, again, that I sort of agree with Amy's point around kind of keeping agile while staying focused. I think that's really important to communicate. People have to know that that's happening so that we can start to collaborate, work together, and follow leading companies lead in how they're doing it.
So Becky, would you like to add anything there in terms of what you've seen?
I was probably nodding my head in violent agreement with two things that Amy said specifically. So when I'm not being a CMO at Deloitte, I'm also a financial services partner working day to day with our clients. And when Amy said digital transformation isn't a thing that's ever done, it's such a valid point that the only constant is change, and that's not getting less true as we go by. And you think we're getting into a space where change is the new norm, or has always been the norm maybe. But I think the other point that really resonated was this intersection of humanity and technology. So the global marketing trends report that we pushed out said that 58% of customers want to see more humanity in their interactions with companies, even when those companies are interacting with them digitally. And I think that's such an interesting challenge for brands to think about, which is how do you embed that humanity into digital experiences? And I work a lot in financial services, and gone are the days where you could walk in to your branch and the branch manager knew you, knew your family, would make a loan to you because he knew you were good for it, because you knew each other for years and years. How do we replace that, that humanity into these interactions using, data, or the richness of data, or, design thinking to really get to the empathetic core of these problems that we're trying to solve? Because I think, that gap between humanity and technology, if we don't face into it, is going to get worse. But I think if we do face into it, there's magic to be had there. One of the most amazing things that came out of our study was that 1 in 7 people had tried a new digital technology through the pandemic, but something like 70% of the people who had tried the new technology enjoyed it more than they enjoyed the in-person experience. So companies are out there doing these things that are delightful. They're getting that intersection of humanity and technology right. But I think, for me, that's the, to Lewis's point about the acid test, the longer we stay in this pandemic, and the longer the world stays in this sort of unusual state, we're going to have to keep getting better and better at doing things in human ways over digital channels. And that's a transformation that I think will never be done.
A lot to unpack there. I guess I'm going to come back to Duncan first, because I know you wanted to make a finer point on something earlier, and then also find out a little bit about how you kind of drive that home within your organization as well as externally.
Yeah, I mean, we've had I guess, a fairly unique set of circumstances this year. So at the beginning of the year, or the turn of the year, we had a new CEO, first female bank CEO in the UK. We introduced a new organizational purpose, a new strategy under the new CEO. And then I guess the even more unique part was we changed the parent name of our organization for the first time in 300 years. And those things all coming together is a pretty unique opportunity. And I guess putting purpose at the heart of that, and then 5 minutes later, COVID taking place, has been a really interesting dynamic. And I guess my point around COVID is that, generally you're either a saint or a sinner. People who are taking the time to observe what organizations are doing during the pandemic is generally because you're doing something they really like or something they really don't like. And I guess on that basis, it offers to some extent a kind of a shot at redemption. UK banks have made more progress on reputation in the last 8 months than they did in the 8 years before that, because actually they've been seen to react to a really difficult situation in a very positive way. I guess the bigger challenge will become, as we reach next normal, and there are other things to talk about than just how are you responding to COVID, whether you're still able to, display a purpose-driven response in those circumstances. But it's COVID has definitely changed the game.
Duncan, I'm going to come back to you for some more details about the new positioning and how you guys did that. But before we go there, Lewis, there's probably a number of things that you wanted to chime in on that we've talked about. Tell us a little bit about how this jives with everything that JLL is doing.
Sure. I actually arrived at JLL during the pandemic. Before then, I was spent the last 7 years at EY, launching and communicating their purpose. So when I arrived at JLL, I came in with a bit of an understanding of how this is going to work. But to be honest with you, never had I tried to do that in such bizarre circumstances as joining an organization to lead its purpose. JLL had made the decision early in the year to start organizing much more around a purpose, which is to shape the future of real estate for a better world. And they started to talk about that from the top in the way that you would expect an organization to. But 2 months later, everything changed. So the attention swiftly became on protecting clients, protecting people, and rightly so. And in a way, it meant the purpose was accidentally sort of stumbled out. And in the way that you were able to do, Amy. You created, the right moment in time, everything came together and you could have that, sort of unveiling. The experience of JLL was to sort of start talking about it, but then pick it back up. Interestingly, what happened, people just started to understand what doing the right thing meant. And the concept of shaping a better world really resonated at a time when people could see everything they thought about the world falling apart. So actually, I would never advise somebody would necessarily do that in the beginning of a pandemic, but bizarrely, it has helped people grasp hold of the deeper meaning of the purpose. And now we're at a stage where we're able to really drive that conversation and engagement internally. And it is about unlocking the small things everybody does every day. We're a 94,000 employee organization, but a lot of those are contractors and people aren't coming into the offices, obviously, as much as they are. So how do we reach people and make them feel connected to an organization? It's very difficult. And I always talk about purposes in the context of shaping a better world, at least for JLL, is shrinking that down to your world, your clients, your community, your teams internally. What are the behaviors and actions that you're doing that exemplify purpose in that little constituent group in your world? And it's when you ladder up all the aggregate effect of that across 94,000 people, that's when we can start to shift the trajectory of the business. And I think people naturally struggled with the concept because they thought one thing was going to happen at the global level that the brand or comms team are going to do that's going to change the trajectory and the perception of how people see it. And obviously, it's very much the reverse. It's very much about making people feel empowered to lead and create actions every day and make sure they understand it's all laddering up into a real powerful change at the enterprise level. So it's been a fascinating experience and one that I'm really excited to continue to adopt as we get further into next year.
Great. And then Ken, I think there was a few things that made sense for you a little bit earlier in the conversation where they were talking about technology and humanity. Feel free to expand upon some of those earlier points.
Yeah, when I stepped back from the humanitarian sector, I didn't want to just go back to a private sector company which had sort of retrofitted purpose into it. But when a charity's formed, part of its articles, it states its purpose. It's legally required to state a purpose. So, I think the benefit that Yoti had is that Yoti is a relatively new company compared to some of the companies from the rest of the panel that have been around for, in some cases, hundreds of years. We're a relatively new company. So we were formed as a B Corp. So from the very beginning, we had those values embedded in the organization from the point of founding. And I think the thing that I feel blessed in a sense with the company is that our products, the products that we sell, they have a built-in social benefit. So today, as we speak, somebody is now, say, arranging a date online with somebody, and they can prove the identity of the person they're about to meet. Women in India, where there's a large number of attacks on women, and women have a pretty hard time, they can feel a bit safer when they go to meet somebody that they've been able to verify an identity. Children in chat rooms can be kept protected from people who are over the age threshold for that particular chat room. People can log into sites and protect their identities and only share the bits of information that they need. So those are all things that the company does as it goes about making money and as it goes about existing. And on top of that, we've managed to build other things that support the social aspects of the wider ecosystem. So, for example, we have a fellowship program which supports 3 individuals in 3 emerging markets around the world. There are 1 billion people on the planet today who can't prove who they are. So they can't access bank accounts, they can't access social services, they can't access education. Those are in countries that we're not commercially active, but we realize that we have technologies, we have expertise, and we have knowledge that can help solve problems for those 1 billion people. So it feels like a very natural extension of the business and a very core part of the purpose to address those challenges for those people. So, CSR, you switch on and off, right? I think you can have a CSR activity, then you can go back to what you were doing and you can have another. Purpose is a daily thing. That's come up quite a few times on this chat already, that purpose runs through everything you do every day, or at least perhaps it should, at least my definition of that is. And so with Yoti, by providing these products and by having these strategies and programs around social purpose, I feel that every day we are contributing in some way to solving a problem. We're not waiting for the next COVID. We're not waiting for the next Black Lives Matter. We're doing it every day.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things that I've been hearing a lot, and I think it came up in some earlier conversations, was, doubling down on purpose. Like, now is the time to double down. There's a lot of that during COVID. Everyone's doubling down on everything. How do you do that without going back to where everybody doesn't believe you again, or kind of starts saying, well, I'm questioning you, or, and I'll just open that up to the group. I mean, what are some ways that you can actually amplify and not, make doing good look bad? I guess would be a way of putting it.
Well, I mean, I have one example, but Ken, I love your background, by the way. You're bringing us an extremely interesting viewpoint.
I won't be playing guitar, not this session, but maybe in the future.
But I do think that purpose will have landed when we are able to cite examples that are not B Corps, actually. Because normally when highly purposeful companies are cited, they're B Corps, which of course they have to be. So when the commercial rest of us are cited, we will have landed. But I think that not directly necessarily related to COVID, but taking stands against racism provided a proof point for all of us to either take or to not take. And the first question, I think, in any pressing social issue is, what role do we play? And for Accenture, because we hire so many people, our role as an employer is relevant in almost every major social issue. And so what we were able to do is continue what we had started many, many years ago in terms of equality in the workplace, to take a good hard look at where did we stand with racism in the workplace? Were we where we should be? No, not even close. And so what our CEO was able to do, with full backing of all who had a voice in this, was say, okay, we're going to do better in the US, UK, and South Africa as 3 places where we can measure and therefore manage how we are doing in % of representation of diverse populations overall and among leadership. And we put a stake in the ground. We took a couple of months to define what those better objectives should be, and just came out with them, starting with an objective in the US. And it's an objective by 2025, and we will all be measured on it, all of us in leadership. And that is a way that we can live our value system, and in a way that is directly relevant to what we do day in and day out. And every piece of research that you would care to find, Becky probably has some, I know we have some as well, that says if you are a responsible business, you achieve better financial results. And we've got a new piece coming out, I think in November, that reproves that case, which you would know intuitively. It's good to prove it back out from time to time, that looks at, if you're very serious about responsible business, then your finances do better, your profit does better. And we can see that quantitatively.
And also, maybe just to add, I think certainly in our case, we have I wouldn't say a better quality of staff. We have great staff, but I know that we are attracting great talent because people are warming to how open we are about what we're doing on social purpose, and the fact that it's embedded in every part of the business. So I think certainly in terms of HR, it brings incredible value if it's done right.
So maybe I'll bring this back to Duncan, because I know you had just launched, and you didn't really get a chance to talk about some of the details about how you've launched and what you're doing. So when you're amplifying this thing and you're trying to make a big splash internally, externally, how do you do it so it feels authentic, and all the other things that we've talked about earlier?
Yeah, so I mean, a couple of the guys have touched on it already. We absolutely have done this from the inside out. I don't think you would see any representation in our above the line work that would make you aware that we've launched a new organizational purpose. So it's definitely something we've started with employees. I mentioned about the power of COVID when it comes to that, because we did this in mid-Feb with colleagues, and I guess 3 weeks later we were locked down. And the phrase we've come to use over the last few months is purpose in action, because the things that we've done for customers, but also for colleagues in the community, have been a really quick way of allowing colleagues to understand what we mean when we talk about purpose. And Lewis touched on this as well. And actually, if you look at now our internal data, we've got incredible scores around the belief in purpose among colleagues. I do think the acid test will come when we're not in a kind of really intense period where we have one thing to focus on. And the things will be more nuanced and complex when we get to that next normal. But we've definitely started from the inside. I guess you talk about doubling down. If you mean that from a brand perspective, I'm not, if it's authentic, you've probably got space to do that. But equally, nice people don't spend all their time telling you how nice they are. People who are not so nice maybe do. And I think it probably goes the same for brands.
Great, great. I mean, one of the things that has been touched upon in both of the past comments, and this is something I'd like to bring to you, Jillian, because I think you had brought up before the conversation, is measurement. And how do you kind of report on it and track it and just kind of make it real, other than we did purpose.
I think part of it actually is about recognizing that audiences, be they consumers, be they internal stakeholders or investors, are actually becoming much more sophisticated in this language. So I think we'd, in past years, been really tempted to make these big, bold statements about targets and then say, oh, and we'll just get on with that, by the way, in the background, and then later we'll tell you how we've done. And I think increasingly we're starting to recognize that people actually can and want to hear the technical detail. They want to hear about how things are changing. They want to hear about the specific measures that you're taking to make those changes. So the examples Amy was just giving about their internal changes, hearing how many people within the groups that they're measuring are working for them now, what the specific recruitment changes or skill changes they're making internally to make the progress they want to make. I think they're the kind of details that people want to hear about. And we've just launched some work with one of our clients, Microsoft. Probably heard of those guys. And I think what's really interesting about their new sustainability strategy is that they've shared some really technical detail about how they're going to achieve their zero carbon goal. They're not just keeping it vague, they're providing some really specific scientific detail behind it and respecting the audiences that they're talking to enough to say, we think you can understand this and we want to provide that evidence so that you can measure how we're doing. And then I guess the other thing I would say is encourage all the people around the table who are purpose leaders to say, actually, even if we don't move as quickly as we wanted to or things change, please be honest, please be transparent about what's happening and what you want to change, because we can't just pretend everything's going well all the time. If we really want to make a difference, we have to acknowledge failure as well as success. And I think the people who are in those leadership positions, if they do that, then other people can follow suit.
Great, great. I mean, Lewis, you came aboard from EY, and what were some of the things that you kind of communicated right out of the gate? Like, these are some of the things at JLL we need to be thinking about. And also, it bears pointing out that because it's more of a B2B play, often values are more important than anything, because people are making this big, complex, long-term decisions. Right. They want to do business with somebody that they feel aligned with. So I don't know.
Absolutely.
For your answer.
Yeah. I mean, all of these points are really good, and I think we're definitely setting up a strategy which is inside out led. We have a leadership team which is fully on board. The reality is, JLL's in the real estate space. The built environment contributes to 40% of the world's CO2 emissions. So in order to get the carbon footprint down, JLL has an active role in that, not only as an organization, but in terms of the work it can do with its clients. So purpose for JLL is absolutely the core of what we do, because we're in a profession which is contributing so much to the world's carbon emissions. So we have set ourselves very stringent targets and goals that's aligned with the UN sustainability goals, which is embedded into the organizational purpose. And first sort of conversation with everybody internally was to unlock that and to actually just tell the story of how much progress has been made. It's not perfect, and quite frankly, it's not good enough. And that's precisely why the rallying call around the purpose is to anchor this more systemic change in this environmental issue. And actually, COVID, from an environmental perspective, has really put a spotlight on this, because we've all seen a change in our natural environment. And obviously, we've all experienced a physical change of how we're all at work. I mean, once upon a time, we probably would have all flown into a place to be around a physical room to do this meeting. And probably now we realize we didn't really need to do that all of the time. Sometimes, yes, but not all of the time. So, what JLL is trying to do now is to piece together evidence through authentic stories of how we help organizations rethink their future, both from a sustainability point of view, the impact they're having in the office space they're leasing or that retail space, but then in terms of the way they're working, the way they're using space is going to change too. The biggest, I think, opportunity we have is just to extract those really powerful, authentic stories and use them in our brand positioning externally to demonstrate that truthful difference that we're making. Again, I believe that consumers and buyers and clients, are really intelligent and switched on when it comes to how a company is marketing to them, more so than ever before. And so therefore, I think the best way you can be is transparent and be truthful. The challenge is in big complex businesses getting those stories out of the system. So you've got to try and figure out, your ambassadors and a way to industrialize that. But once you've got that, the first time I think a member of staff sees something externally which talks about something you've done internally, the power that has from a pride perspective is unwavering, and then employee engagement will increase. And I think that's a really powerful metric for purpose, because typically that employee metric denotes the sense of pride in an organization. And that the most engaged teams typically are the most productive. Typically they probably have higher account margin than other teams, the least engaged teams. So it really is a good focus point to make your people.
Great. So I think now that we're kind of coming up to the end of the session, and we do have 6 remarkably smart people on the phone, on the Zoom call. I'd like each of you to share, 1 or 2 insights that our viewers at home or wherever they may be can actually implement or learn from or be inspired by. And you could also use as an opportunity to touch on something that perhaps we didn't talk about or drill more deeply into. And I'll probably bring it back to Amy, because she kind of kicked us off. So Amy, if there's 1 or 2 things that the folks at home should just really be thinking about, what would that 1 or 2 things be?
Well, to me, the most important thing about purpose is that it be linked intrinsically to the core of your business and what you do as a commercial enterprise, if you are a commercial enterprise. And that it be authentic all the way through, inside to outside, outside to inside.
Great. So Becky, I think we'll come to you next. I mean, having you were rooted in this great research and whatnot.
So I guess the one thing that I would say is dial up the empathy. We've seen in this pandemic where everybody's been laser focused on doing things to be helpful. And I think the biggest challenge for us is, as things return back to normal, that we don't lose sight of that empathy, and that, we use, whether it's data to drive insights, or if it's, human-centered design or customer research, to really understand what it is that's going on in the market so that we can respond, to what customers need as humans. I think that I look forward to reading Amy's research about how this sort of responsible behavior drives better market performance, but we know that to be true. The more we're able to listen and really understand what the human beings in the ecosystem actually need, the better the business will perform. So dial up the empathy.
Yes, that's hugely important. Jillian, anything that we should be adding from the comms lens or beyond?
I think my main thing is to get those who are taking a really great stance on purpose to think about the power of your voice can have as an organization and an individual. So as I've said already, if you're an industry leader, then you can influence the other businesses, your competitors, your peers, to follow your lead and take things forward. But also think about how you can influence your customers, about your investors, your stakeholders. The more you talk about what you care about as an organization and why it's important to the world and your industry as a whole, the more you can bring other people along that journey with you. So whether that's influencing customers to make different choices when they're making their purchases, or whether it's encouraging investors to make a different choice when they're thinking about where they want to go. I think we really need to see people taking that leadership position, being transparent and honest, and saying, come with me on the journey and do it together, and think about, your opportunity and your voice as a purpose leader to do that.
Great. Duncan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're all going to say similar things, right? I mean, it feels like the obvious thing to say is that, you should only activate purpose through your brand when it's an authentic representation of what your company is about. And even then, you should do it at times when it feels like that's aligned with what the public discussion is. And that should be about more than your bought media. It should be what your leaders are talking about. It should be how you're shaping your products and services. Otherwise, I think it risks feeling like a sales exercise.
Right, which you don't want it to be, certainly. Lewis, anything to add to that?
I mean, yeah, really agree with everything. I suppose second time of doing this in a large, complex business, I would say, don't let this sit just within the brand marketing communications function. Very quickly, people in the business see it as, oh, that's something that you guys will take care of. The reality is this has got to be the lens for every single decision that business makes. So we've got to find a way of bringing all of the leaders on board, and otherwise it just becomes a thing. People in the business look at the corporate team, talk about on the website, they do some promotional material. It doesn't sit right in the heart of the business. So do the hard yards and get as many people around it as you can. There's going to be one or two early adopters, find them. Hopefully the CEO is one of them, but you need that middle management layer, in my experience, to be as passionate about it. Otherwise it stops. It doesn't get into the heart of the organization.
Great. And Ken, the exclamation point.
Yeah, I would say it has to be authentic and aligned. We've touched on those as well. But I think also, just going back to what Lewis said, I think everybody within the organization has to feel part of the machinery delivering on the purpose, whether they're CEO or they're part-time receptionist or whatever it might be. And I think building that momentum internally, yes, senior management buy-in is essential. I think it's almost impossible to get much done without that. But making every single person take pride in what the company's doing, to understand what the company's doing, and to feel a part of what the company's doing are absolutely key ingredients for me.
Perfect. Great way to end it. So I just want to thank everybody, this wonderful panel, for sharing their insights and sharing their wisdom for the folks who are watching. And I want to thank everybody who's tuned in and taken the time to learn along with us. And I think there's a lot that can be done here, and there's a lot of really great insights that we can all move forward with. So thank you.